Hello and welcome to Archvelder's Hacks with Archvelder and his amazing hacks. This bug completely breaks world PvP, but it's actually been around for years, since Legion in fact. It allows you to do millions of damage in a single blast, instantly one-shotting enemy players. So, if you pay attention to such things, you'll note that some exploiters were taking advantage of a glitch in Mythic Plus, involving that wholesome activity Warcraft players just love to engage in, murdering small animals. Blizzard apparently made some sort of fix, but you can still have a lot of fun with it in world PvP. In this video I'm using a Shadow Priest, but you can actually pull off the same trick with several classes. Priests are fantastically broken at the moment. You can do all kinds of things. Here's my priest in shadow form whilst in holy spec. And here's my priest with a narrow assisting them in shadow spec. Things which should not be possible. Because those things can be used in competitive forms of Warcraft, I'm keeping them secret right now. But they're on my Patreon for the curious. Now, back to this exploit, and what you need for it to work is access to a low-level mob. The reason is that when a max level player attacks a low level mob, they gain the legacy damage buff, which allows them to do millions of damage. This is so max level players aren't impeded by trivial mobs to any extent, as they were in earlier incarnations of Warcraft. Note that this exploit no longer works on critters, which presents some problems with applying this method in practice. So this exploit depends upon the talent Psychic Link, which is early on in the Shadow talent tree. This ability transfers 30% of all the direct damage you do onto players with Vampiric Touch. Because of sloppy coding, the huge damage you do to low-level NPCs doesn't scale down at all. Here's a good example. So, I've started a duel between my priest and one of my ults. I've also kited a low-level mob here in Elwyn Forest, which is attacking my ult. Now, I cast a Vampiric Touch onto my ult with my priest. I then switch targets to the low-level NPC and cast mindgames. The damage transferred from the low-level mob is almost 2 million, easily enough to one-shot most characters. With consumables, you can get it up to 4 million with best-in-slot gear. Now, this works fine for single targets. For multiple targets, you'll want to use Talented Shadow Crash on enemy players, as this casts Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain on all targets within the radius of the target reticle, allowing you to potentially one-shot multiple players. Now, it looks easy, but it is actually surprisingly difficult to get this to work in practice. You have to cast Shadow Crash or Psychic Link onto your target, then kite an NPC into range of the target. If they weren't within 40 yards of your target, the Psychic Link damage doesn't get transferred. You then have to kill the low-level NPC and make sure you do over 300% of the enemy player's health pool in the process. The highest damage ability to do this with is Mind Games, with all of its talent modifiers. The problem with Mind Games is that it has a cast time, and against multiple opponents, you will be lucky to get a cast off before you are interrupted. The alternatives are Void Torrent, which is instant and does a lot of damage, but unfortunately generally kills low-level mobs before it's finished channeling all that damage. There's also Shadow Word Death. This doesn't do enough damage normally, however I came up with an interesting strategy to enhance its power. Using the Soft Foam Sword toy item, you can bring a low-level NPC down to low health without killing them, and when you then cast Shadow Word Death, its damage is greatly enhanced as you finish off the low-level NPC. So you can use the foam sword on the NPC, kite it near an enemy player, cast Vampiric Touch or Shadow Crash on an enemy player, and then use Shadow Word Death on your low health, low level NPC, killing the enemy player with an instant cast. Mind Games, Void, Torrent and Shadow Word Death can all be good options in specific circumstances. The main thing is to ensure you do enough damage to kill players outright from Psychic Link, and that you can actually use the ability before you get interrupted. Now, what I've shown here is very much fun stuff to do in World PvP. There's a lot more here to discover and develop. For example, what if you could conjure low-level mobs out of thin air and then use them to transfer damage? Sounds fantastic, but it is actually currently possible to do that using a method on my Patreon. If you can't afford my Patreon, or you just don't want to sign up for whatever reason, here's a clue. If you want to use that method, you can really troll the opposition. There are also ways to use buffs to effectively create low-level NPCs in locations where that would normally be impossible. And as I mentioned at the start, there are other class abilities which do much the same thing as Psychic Link.